One of the most fascinating stories in Harry Potter is Barty Crouch Jr. and Winky's story. If you never read the Goblet of Fire book, you probably missed the big picture of what happened in the background. That's why in today's video, I'm going to be explaining everything you need to know about Barty Crouch Jr., Winky, and the big role they played in the 4th book. So let's get into it. Barty Crouch Jr. was born in 1962 into the influential pure-blood Crouch family, which had strong connections to the Ministry of Magic. Bartemius Crouch Sr.'s intent on catching dark wizards and becoming Minister of Magic likely played a role in him not paying enough attention to his son. It's very possible that this had an influence on the younger Barty's life choices. His mother, Mrs. Crouch, was a wispy-looking witch who dearly loved him. The family had a house elf named Winky. She was dedicated to her master, Barty Crouch Sr. and his family, a duty passed down from her mother before her and grandmother before that. Barty attended Hogwarts and was sorted into Ravenclaw House. He had achieved 12 OWLs. It's very likely that he knew many other Death Eaters and their allies at school, such as Severus Snape, Regulus Black, and Lucius Malfoy. Barty took the Dark Mark in his late teens, and after Lord Voldemort's first defeat in 1981, he worked with Death Eaters searching for their fallen master. He was captured with Bellatrix, Rodolphus, Inrabist, and Lestrange. After they tortured the Aurors, Alice and Frank Longbottom with the Cruciatus Curse, driving the couple into insanity, Barty and the other Death Eaters were brought to trial, over which his father presided. Barty was insistent on his innocence, claiming he had not taken part in the crimes, and begged his father to clear him out of charges. Barty's father chose to make a public example of his son and sentenced him to a term of life imprisonment in Azkaban at the age of roughly 19. According to Sirius Black, the trial was no more than an excuse to show how much the father hated the child, and Barty was screaming inside his cell for his mother for the first few days, but then quieted down from the extreme depressive influence of the Dementors, as did many other prisoners. Barty already looked in a poor health when he was brought in, as Sirius described. In 1982, Mrs. Crouch was ill and was going to die. The couple were allowed to visit due to Crouch Sr.'s high status in the ministry, and as Mrs. Crouch's dying wish, she persuaded her husband to help smuggle their son out of Azkaban by swapping him for his mother, using Polyjuice Potion, and undetected by the blind Dementors. Mrs. Crouch took the place of her son. She died a short time later and was buried under the guise of her son. Crouch Jr. was brought back to the family household, where he was nursed back to health by their house elf Winky. Barty's only goal is to search for his master, which he made no effort to hide from his father, to protect his son's sacred existence from the public, and to prevent him from searching for Voldemort. Crouch Sr. was forced to use the Imperious Curse on him and forced him to hide under the invisibility cloak all the times. Bertha Jonkis, a Ministry of Magic employee, accidentally discovered the truth when she came unannounced to the Crouch home with some papers for Mr. Crouch to sign, in which she heard Winky talking with someone invisible, enough to deduce who was hidden. Crouch Sr. fixed this with a memorial charm, so powerful that she suffered permanent brain damage. Shortly thereafter, Peter Pettigrew ran into Bertha while searching for Voldemort, in the hopes that she would prove useful to him. Peter tricked her into going with him. She ended up proving very useful to Voldemort. Not only did he extract the whereabouts of his loyal servant, but also gathered information of the Triwizard Tournament, which was to be held at Hogwarts. Voldemort murdered Bertha, and the ministry deemed her missing for months. As a reward of his son's good behavior, with months of persuasion from Winky, Crouch Sr. reserved a seat at the 1994 Quidditch World Cup between Ireland and Bulgaria for Winky and himself, and allowed his son to take the seat under the concealment of the invisibility cloak. Winky's fear of heights had led her to cover her eyes the entire time, leading her to Miss Crouch, who was starting to resist the Imperious Curse, stealing a wand from Harry, who was sitting next to him with the Weasleys. Crouch Jr. was able to fight the Imperious Curse and gain some control over himself. He launched the Dark Mark into the sky over the campgrounds. Ministry officials fired multiple standing spells through the woods. The Ministry of Magic officials then revived Winky and blamed her for casting the Dark Mark with the wand, despite Winky claiming she didn't know how to. Blaming Winky was implying that she learned how to do such a thing as its own house. Crouch Sr. freed Winky to avoid associating himself with the Dark Mark. Winky screamed and begged in what Harry described as a pitiful manner when she was facing her master's cold remarks, which apparently did not stir his sympathies at the very least. Crouch Sr.'s treatment of Winky, by the way, led Hermione to create the Society of the Promotion of Elfish Welfare, aka SPEW. Crouch Sr. found his son's unconscious body behind the bushes and recasted the Imperious curse on him after the other fishes left, and the two returned home. Winky fell into a state of depression after being fired by her master, believing that she had shamed her mother and grandmother before her, and started drinking Batterby regularly. Dobby was able to get her a job at Hogwarts working in the kitchens. Though unlike Dobby himself, she was still attached to her former masters and had no interest in doing any work. Left alone in the house with only father and son, one night Peter Pettigrew and Voldemort suddenly appeared at the home. Voldemort needed a loyal follower to help him regain power, and easily managed to free Barty from his father's imprisonment. They put Crouch Sr. under the Imperious curse and forced him to keep working at the ministry as he usually would. Barty was charged with sneaking into Hogwarts Castle, entering Harry's name into the Goblet of Fire, and guided him through the Triwizard Tournament without having appeared to do so. Barty accomplished this by breaking into former Auror Alastor Mad-Eye Moody's home and kidnapping him. He created Polyjuice Potion from Alastor's hair and concealed the Auror in his own magical trunk. He then proceeded to take over Alastor's job at Hogwarts, teaching defense against the dark arts. He was able to maintain his disguise for months undetected. He kept Moody alive under the Imperious curse to continue harvesting hair for Polyjuice Potion and to question him about his personality, behavior, and knowledge in order to make the act more convincing. Barty used his time at Hogwarts to gain the trust of the students and staff. As a teacher, Barty was actually quite effective. He entered Harry's name under a fourth school into the Goblet of Fire, confusing it with a powerful Confundus charm, and helped Harry throughout the 3 phases of the tournament. He pushed Harry into showing Harry the dragons, later suggesting that Harry play to his strengths to pass the task, and thus giving Harry the idea of using a broomstick to accomplish it. He advised Cedric Diggory into telling Harry how to work out the Golden Egg clue, knowing that he would repay Harry for telling him about the dragons. He also planted the book about plants into Neville early on, hoping that Neville would tell him about gillyweed for the underwater task. Barty also called Dobby into the staff room and staged a loud discussion with Professor McGonagall about gillyweed right in front of Dobby. The house elf responded by stealing the plants from Severus Snape's personal stores and giving it to Harry on the day of the task. During the event surrounding the tournament, Crouch Sr. escaped from his home and traveled to Hogwarts, where he wandered in his confession in search of Dumbledore, planning on confessing about he smuggled his son from Azkaban. Crouch Sr. came upon Harry and Victor Crumb, but by then he was so insane that he was unable to clearly convey anything. Crouch Jr., having kept an eye on the Marauders map he borrowed from Harry, arrived at the scene before anyone else and waited for Harry to leave before he stunned Victor and killed his father. He transfigured his father's body into a bone and buried it in front of Rubius' cabin. Before the third and final task of the tournament, Barty volunteered to place the Triwizard Cup in the maze. He took advantage of the opportunity to turn the Triwizard Cup into a portkey. He stunned Lord Delacour and used the Imperious Curse on Victor to get rid of Cedric. Harry got to the cup along with Cedric, transporting them to the Little Hangleton graveyard. Peter performed his spell to restore Lord Voldemort's physical body, using Harry's blood, Peter's own hand, and Tom Riddle Sr.'s bone from the grave. When Harry escaped the graveyard and returned to Hogwarts, Barty took him away from the panicking crowd to interrogate him about Voldemort's return. He revealed to Harry that it was he all along who guided him through the tournament. Barty then planned on killing Harry and being honored above the rest of Voldemort's followers. But before he could, Albus with Minerva and Severus fired a stunning spell at him, having realized that he was not Alastor when he removed Harry from his sight. After the Polyjuice Potion wore off, Barty confessed everything to Albus under the influence of Veritaserum, a strong truth potion. However, before he could testify, Barty suffered a fate worse than death, receiving the Dementor's kiss by a Dementor the Minister of Magic Linus Fudge brought with him. Crouch Jr.'s soul removal marked the end of the Crouch family bloodline, and what happened to Crouch's empty body following this is unknown. Winky was present at that time, and her distress deepened. Dumbledore then requested Madame Pomfrey to do all she could to comfort Winky before letting Dobby look after her. After the war, Winky would continue to work at Hogwarts and would eventually stop her butterbeer addiction, but it is unknown if she ever got over the losses suffered by the Crouch family. If you want to see the story of Kreacher and Regulus Black, click on this video over here. Thanks for watching and I'll see you again soon.